Hello there, this is Aaron, and in this tutorial I'm going to be teaching you how to add an image texture to the interactive cube object that Finn showed you how to model. As you can see, I have Finn's blend file open. I've deleted the existing texture node that he created for his UV process, and now I just have this blank 3D model and the UV is ready for me. I have my UV image file here, just like last time. What we're going to do first is right-click the file, go down here to open with, and you want to open the file in a digital drawing program of some kind, like Adobe Photoshop. And here we are in Photoshop. You can see that we have our UV islands here with a transparent background. So just like last time, what we want to do first is we want to go up here to File and do Save As, and we want to save to the computer. And all I'll change about the name is just texture. And instead of a PNG, I want to save this file as a Photoshop document, which is a .psd, PDD, or PSDT. And this will allow us to make the changes to the file that we'll need in order to create our texture. Yes, we are fine with having maximized compatibility on. Now, I want to remind everyone that the reason we want to right-click and open our file like we did in Photoshop, instead of, say, creating a new Photoshop document, copying and pasting the UV image in here, is that there's no guarantee that you'll be able to arrange these UV islands in exactly the same position on exactly the same size canvas. So that will mean that your textures will be ever so slightly off because the original 3D modeling file is going to be referencing this exact layout, this exact position of all of these different UV islands. So that's why it's essential that we open up the UV in the program and then save the file as something that we can manipulate. Okay, so first thing that I'll do is rename this layer to UV, and we will change its layer type to multiply so that we'll be able to see all the layers beneath it. Add a new layer, and I'll call this layer base. And I'm just going to use my color selection tool to grab the color white. I'll go over here to my paint bucket tool. And just a reminder here that if you aren't seeing the paint bucket tool, what you probably have in your default Photoshop interface is the gradient tool. So how to get to the paint bucket tool is you just come over to the gradient tool, hover over it, click and hold, and it'll bring up this little submenu. Drag your cursor while you continue to click and hold over to the paint bucket tool, release your click, and now you have the paint bucket selected. So we will fill this base with white. There we go. Now I can see a little easier kind of what I'm working with here. I'm going to add a new layer on top of that, and I'm going to call this one Center. Now I've got my rectangular selection tool, and the reason I called this layer Center is that I'm going to start creating the center of each of these little faces of the cube, and we will work our way out from there. I'll show you how to do one first, and then I'll speed through the rest. Pretty simple, so you just try to align your crosshair for your rectangular selection tool right on the border where the center face starts, and you just want to kind of drag, click and drag, and there we go. Now we've fully selected the center, and I will go back to my paint bucket tool, And in the original interactive cube design, the center of the cube was a very vibrant, saturated orange color. So I will select that and pop this right on here. I think I'm going to increase the tint a little bit here. It's a little brighter. I think that it's just because of my UV over it. Yeah, that's actually quite a vibrant orange, even though it doesn't look that way, because we have our UV multiply layer on top of it. Okay, so we have a nice bright orange. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the cubes. Alright, now I will Control Alt scroll back to scroll out to zoom out. And there we go. I have all of the centers colored in for my cube. So what I will do now is remove the visibility on my UV layer. Control S to save. It's always good to do that consistently. Go up to File, down here to Export, and click Export as a PNG. And I'll go ahead and name it the same name as my Photoshop file, just so it'll be right next to it. We'll do Save. Now let's go back over to Blender. We'll switch to the Shading workspace. Shift A to create a texture, image texture. Put it to the left of our material here. Assign the color by clicking and dragging. Now we will find that wonderful texture file that we just made. And there we have it. Ah, looks great so far. Alright, let's switch back over to Photoshop. Turn that UV back on, and we will start working our way out from the center. I want to go ahead and add another layer. I'll drag that underneath the center layer, but on top of the base layer. And we are going to call this Inner Border. Okay. Now I want to add a little bit of one way to make your simple 3D models look a little bit nicer, especially one way to make your simple 3D models look a little bit nicer is to add some false shading to convey a little bit more depth on the object. Even though it is a three-dimensional object, the way that lighting programs work, the way that lighting works in various game engines and other things that your 3D models may exist in with what you're doing, well, it's not always the best in terms of getting your 3D models to have nice-looking shadows that help them stand out and make them look good. So when you have something really simple and geometric like a cube, adding a little bit of false shadow, false depth to it can add a lot. So what we're going to do is create that inner border. So just like before with the center, I'm going to use my rectangular selection tool, come up here to this sort of empty space right where the these two lines would be meeting, would be intersecting. I'm trying to get it as close to as I can. And then I will click and drag and encompass this inner border here. Okay, very good. Now, as far as color goes, since I have a white base and I'm trying to create some false shadow, I want to have like a nice gray. Go over here to paint bucket, fill in that area. We'll remove the UV just to check how these colors are working together. And I think that looks quite nice. Okay, let's go ahead and make the rest of them. Okay, now we have all the inner borders created for our cube. So again, I will remove that UV visibility, Control S, and we will export our PNG once more. Now remember, it's important to save over the same file. I guess you don't have to, but personally I find it easier. It helps to not have a bunch of files cluttering up your space here. I'll save it under the same name. Yes, I'd like to replace that image. Go back over here to Blender and open it up once more. Awesome. Yeah, this is just the look I want. So this is going really well so far. Let's continue. Now I would like to add a nice dark border here on the edges of the cube. So what I would actually like to do is just to make things a little easier on myself. So what I'd like to do first is create a new layer, and I want this layer to be underneath that inner border layer, but still on top of that base layer, and we will call this outer border. Okay. What I'm going to do is fill in all of these main square areas with black, and then I'm going to preserve the opacity of that layer, change it to white, and then I'm going to change this base layer color to black, and that will help to create the nice dark border that I'm going for without me having to work too much. So first we will zoom in, and just like before with the inner border, I'm trying to find with my rectangle selection tool just where these two lines right here would kind of hypothetically intersect as best as I can, and then click and hold to fill up this area here. Paint bucket tool, fill it up, and there we go. Now I'll do the rest. Okay, so now that I have all of these black squares filled in, what I first want to do is go down to my base layer, and I'm going to change the color to black, because this is the real color that I want the border to be. And now I'll change my color to white, go up here to the outer border layer, and I am going to do a transparency lock where I lock the transparent pixels. And basically what that does is I'll go over to my brush tool, make it a little bit bigger, and all of the area on that outer border layer that we've locked, that we've drawn on, that is now the only area that you can draw on. So we can turn all of those black squares white quite easily. I'm going over this a few times just to make sure I have everything filled in. And there we have it. I'll go ahead and unlock that by clicking the little lock icon. I will remove the visibility of the UV, Control S to save, and let's re-export our image texture and pop that back onto our 3D model in Blender. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, that looks so cool. Awesome. One fun thing that you can do now that you have all of these colors blocked in for your cube is to add a fun little icon to the center of each of these orange squares. That's what we did for the design for the cube in our game. So what I'm going to do is go over to my files where I have the original PNG of the duck icon that I made for that game. And all I'm going to do is click and drag it into my Photoshop program, and it pops up right here. The first thing that I want to do is scale everything down, because you'll notice these options up here have appeared, and I can make some modifications to the image I just imported. Then I can confirm those changes to fully bring it into the program. So I am first going to hold down Shift and click on this bounding box up here in the corner and scale down my image, holding down Shift so it preserves that aspect ratio. And it's okay that I can't see my duck right now, because I just want to try to get it just a little bit smaller than the orange cube. I want it so that the bounding boxes from this view that I'm in right now are just barely touching the edges of that orange cube. Now I'll go up here and hit the check mark to confirm, and I will scooch my duck icon layer until it's on top of the center layer. Now, so I don't have to scale down every time and I make sure that my duck icon is the same size for all of them, I'm just going to go ahead and select this one, Control C to copy, Control D to deselect, and I'm going to start putting our lovely duck on the rest of these orange center squares. Okay, now that I have all of the duck icons placed, I'm going to go ahead and combine all of these layers. I may have to do some adjusting once I put the texture on the 3D model. Some of these faces may need to be rotated so that they are oriented the correct way, but that's not a big deal. So I'll go up here to the top duck, the last duck that I added, and while I am holding down Shift, I will left click the original duck icon layer so that I have all of those layers selected with all of my ducks. I'll do Control E to merge, and I'll rename this layer ducks. And there we go. Now my UV is already gone, so I don't need to get rid of it to export, but let us see how this is looking on our cube. Awesome, okay. No way. Looks like they all look correct on the very first try. That's pretty awesome. That goes to show you, having a really good UV can make the texturing process a lot easier. Okay. You've successfully textured your interactive cube. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.